We're going to be starting in James chapter 5. Look like about 20 verses, so let's start reading. We'll just start with AY and work our way back that way. I can't never remember where we stopped and we take off, so I don't guess it matters as long as we get the chapter read. So start with AY, one verse, and let it pass on back.
Go to now, you rich man, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you.
Your riches are corrupted and your garments are moth-eaten.
Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rest of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as if it were fire. You have heaped treasure together for the last days.
Behold the hire of the laborers, who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabbath.
You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury, and you have fattened your hearts as in a day of slaughter.
You have condemned and killed the just, and he does not resist you.
Be ye patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman is ready for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rain.
Be ye also patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh.
Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door.
Take my brethren, the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and patience.
Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and ye have seen the end of the Lord, and the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy.
But above all things, my brethren, fear not, neither by heaven nor by earth, neither any other oath, but let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay, lest you fall into condemnation.
Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing psalms.
Is anyone among you sick? Let him call for the elders of the church and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord.
And the prayer of faith will save the sick, and the Lord will raise him up. And if he has committed sins, he will be forgiven.
Confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of righteous men availeth much.
Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain. And it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months.
And he prayed again, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth brought forth her fruit.
My brethren, if any among you strays from the truth, and one turns him back,
let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins.
All right. Chapter 5 has been read, and so I hope everyone has studied this chapter, because this chapter's got some things in it that some may find a little hard to understand, and there are just some things about it that we need to understand, and I guess hopefully we can search out each and every one of them as we do this book or this chapter and come to an understanding of all of it. All right. James just finished up chapter 4, and in the last verse here in chapter 4, he admonishes them and tells them, therefore him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it's sin. And then he comes to chapter 5, and he begins to talk about the rich here. Now, these rich people here, and as this, I think this guy points out, is different than some of the other riches, or the rich that we've talked about. So as we talk about this, we'll try to bring these things out. What are the rich men told to do?
Weep and howl for the visitors that's coming.
When you think about that verse there, he tells them to weep and howl for the miseries that shall come upon you. What do you see in that verse? I mean, do you see anything that would make you think of something that was going to happen maybe in a short time to them, or in the distance in judgment?
Destruction of Jerusalem.
That's one of the things that I was looking at, is go to now, you rich, and weep and howl for the misery that shall come upon you. You remember that Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 24 the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, if James is written, some think that James was written in the mid-60s. So even back into the 40s. But if you're looking at this and say that since we don't know exactly the date that it was written, but say you could move this letter into the mid-60s, then you're looking at what? 4, 5 years to the fall of Jerusalem? And you think about the miseries that were going to befall Jerusalem, how that it would be sieged, and all your wealth that you had it's really no good to you. I mean, how would you like to have, let's say, Jed Clampett's money? Beverly Hillbillies, some of you may not remember what I'm talking about, but say if you had his money, I think he had like $80 billion in this TV show. If you had this kind of money, but no way to buy anything, there was just nothing to buy with it, would that not be miserable in some ways? I mean, here you've been rich all your life. You've bought everything that you want, not worried about it, just pay it out, buy it. But now the place where you're at becomes sieged by an army compassed around it. And now you're not able to buy, sell, or do anything. Though you got all these riches within the wall of Jerusalem, but there's nothing within Jerusalem that you can buy with it. There's no food. They're starving to death. Josephus talks about how bad these times were. So to me, I can see that James is talking about a time that's going to shortly come up on them. Now, just like from Matthew chapter 24, there's two different ends that you can draw from Matthew 24. I think that at one place he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem when he says, if there's two in the field, don't turn back to the house to get nothing, you flee. If you're up on top of your house and you see these signs, don't go down to take nothing out of your house, flee. That end there is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, not the end of the world. Because if it's the end of the world, the end of time, it will do you no good to flee. So clearly that's not talking about the end of time. But then he does come on over in that chapter and talk about the end of time, how it will be. So the end of Jerusalem and the end of time sort of can be looked at as being pretty much in similar language, such as Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. At the end of time, this world is going to be destroyed. It's going to be burned up. It's going to melt with fervent heat. So he talks about you rich are corrupted. Your riches are corrupted and your garments are moth-eaten. So to me, he's talking about people here that has their riches that they've never used them, and I'm probably answering a question, so maybe I just need to get down here.
Well, that seemed to be the notion of the writer here, that it was just hoarded back, saying not used. But I had a thought myself when I read it forward. I think it might shine a little bit different light. It says, indeed, the wages of your laborers who moved your fields, which you kept by fraud, cry out. To me, that shines a little bit different light on it. When we're thinking back to the corruption part of it, maybe it's not, might shine a little bit light on it there. They gained it by fraud, because not all riches are corrupted, we know. And what made this corrupt? It's the way they got it.
Well, the fact of it is like this. They harbored up everything. Now, when he says your riches are corrupted and your garments are moth-eaten, the riches sure that are corrupted is the fact that this is speaking, and this guy talks about this, so this is going to answer a question when we get down to it. This is not talking about money here, but verse 3 is, your silver and your gold is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness to you. And what it is that yes, they did beat their laborers. Now, where they was keeping back every penny of it or not, or just not really giving them a fair wage for their day work, could be brought into that, because you defraud people when you don't pay them what you should. You're defrauding that person.
Well, we know what God also thinks about a person that has that attitude that, I have plenty, my barns are not big enough.
Yeah.
We're going to tear them down and build more. That idea of storing up a big bunch for me.
Yeah.
Hoarding back. God really don't like that.
All right. So, yeah.
Sometimes we miss the point too when we kind of make words apply to what they mean today. Corrupted also means perish, wasted away. So corrupted ain't necessarily like you got the riches in a bad way. It's just they will decay or perish because you can't use them possibly.
That's true. And another thought to that, and I think this is one of the thoughts here, and I think this is where James is sort of going to this. You've had all these riches. You've had all this stuff laid up here. And before you would share it or help the needy, you would let your grain sit there and spoil just because you would not, just like the rich man. What would he not give from his table to Lazarus?
Crumbs.
He wouldn't even give him the crumbs. So I think it's talking about, here this guy has got so much that it's going to spoil before he would share it with anybody. So it sits there and it corrupts. His garments, his fine garments, hangs in a we'll say a closet. How many in here knows what a mothball was created for? When you stored clothes for a long period of time, what did you do? You put mothballs in them. Because you could get a piece of garment out that you hadn't wore in a long time, and you'd see these little bitty holes all in them. And I would have never dreamed that a moth would eat material, but it will. So here the Bible is saying, you let these garments hang here and let the moths destroy them before you'd say, hey, wait a minute, I don't need that, I don't need this, I don't need that, I don't need that. Let me give it to somebody that could use it. Now I think that's what James is saying about this rich. Now you come on down here, and this same rich would hire somebody. They have hard laborers, and they work them in their fields, and they are the ones that's gathering in this grain and stuff like that. And yet, when it comes time to pay them, they defraud them by either not paying them anything or not paying them as they said they would. Now, to defraud in those days, we see just like when Paul talks to King, Agrippa and Felix and them, he shows what was it that Felix hoped to gain from Paul when he talked to him? Money, bribes, and things like that. So if you was a poor person trying to go to court with somebody that had this, what do you think they would do when they went into the court system as they would know it back then? What do you think they would do about that?
Like they do now, I guess.
Hey, a big bribe to those that were crooked, and the rich would automatically win. So that's what you're looking when you're looking at this. So what James is saying to them is, look, and I'm just going to jump down to verse 6. Talking to these rich, he said, you have condemned, you have killed the just, and doeth not, and he does not resist you. Now, from James chapter 1 down to verse 6, I don't think he's talking about his Christian brethren here, because he calls them brethren all the way through, but James chapter 5 verses down through 6 here, he does not call them brethren, but when he comes to verse 7, he drops back to brethren. So James, according to verse 6, is talking about those Jews who would persecute the Christians, misuse the Christians because they're the ones that was being defrauded against. They were the ones being killed. This was what was going on in the Jewish nation. Now remember, when Paul obeyed the gospel and he was in the city, who plotted to kill Paul, and they had to let Paul down over the wall? Jews. Who was it that shaved their head and took an oath that they would not eat or drink until they seen Paul dead? Jews again. So you see, the Jews was persecuting the Christians. Let's take it one step further. Paul said that he was a Hebrew of Hebrews. My father was a Hebrew. My mother was a Hebrew. But what did Paul do before he was converted? He made havoc of the church. He persecuted Christians. They laid their clothes at a young man who was Saul standing there when they stoned Stephen. Who was doing this? The Jews. So James is saying, look, here's what the Jewish nation has done. The rich, you have persecuted, you have did this to these Christian people, but now their cries is coming up to God. They're crying for justice. What was going to be the justice for the Jewish nation against what they had done that Jesus said was going to befall them? He stands and looks at Jerusalem. John says that he came unto his own, chapter 1, and his own received him not. But to as many of them as received him gave he power to become sons. Now, what did the Jewish nation do to Jesus? He come to his own, and they would receive him not. Jesus, because of that, Jesus would stand and overlook Jerusalem and weep over it and say to Jerusalem, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often would I have taken you under my wings and you would not?" You know what Jesus is looking at and what he's thinking about right there? When he's crying over Jerusalem, do you think, what is he talking, or what is he thinking?
He's thinking the destruction is coming upon him.
Right. He's thinking about this destruction that was going to hit these people because they had rejected God. They had rejected God. And for that reason, they were going to pay a great penalty for that. A great penalty for it. In AD 70, they did. And so I think that this is what James is talking about when he says, "Howl for your misery. Weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you." Now he's talking about the rich here. He's talking about the rich. But when you look at this, again, the misery wasn't only to the rich, but it was to the poor. Now, again, those Christians that had heard Jesus' teachings, and Jesus had given them fair warning about what was going to happen here. He gives them signs to look at. Now, they wanted the sign of the end of the world, and Jesus said there's no sign going to be there. But here's your sign for the destruction of Jerusalem. He says, when you see that which is spoken of Daniel standing in the holy place, know that the time is nigh. So what was it that Daniel was speaking of being in the holy place? Well, the holy place in Jerusalem, in the temple. But what would be standing there that would defile that temple?
Roman army, is that what you mean?
Roman army, exactly. Roman army would be standing there, and they would be compassed about. They say that dogs was offered on the altar and everything there. So that would be some of the defilement of that. So Jesus said, when you see this, know that the end is nigh. Not the end of the world now, but the end that he is talking about for Jerusalem. And he said, now when you see these, he said, you need to make your way out there. Pray that that your flight be not on the Sabbath, because if it is, the gates is closed. Pray that it be not in the winter, because if it's in the winter, time is going to be hard traveling. Woe unto them that give suck to children in that day. That's women that nurses babies, because they got a baby to take care of and to protect. So you see, Jesus is telling them, pray that this thing may not happen at that time. Now he goes on and say, now if these days be not shortened, they would be no flesh. But for the elect's sake, which is talking about Christians, he said these days shall be shortened. In other words, it'll be swift and fast. Because he was protecting those elect. It was those that were rich that was going to be so miserable, because they were going to lose everything they had. It would be like the Wall Street falling again.
What's the lesson in that for us?
Huh?
What's the lesson in that for us?
Good question. Coming back. Look at the same verse. Verse 1. If your life is set on the riches, and the only thing that you can see is like these people, for people that just want to hoard it and not use it. What is it that Jesus said? It's going to be as easy for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven.
What you're saying, be ready, really.
Well, he's given a warning about the riches. The love of money is the root of all evil. So he's telling us about money. If money is what we're all about, then we're going to fall into the same category as these riches right here. Now, we won't go through what they did in Jerusalem, but certainly we're going to face God in a judgment. And we're going to have to give an account. And if we're not good stewardess with what God has given us, what do you think is going to happen to us? For an example, think about the talent people. Think about the talents that Jesus gave. He gave what to one? He gave one to one. He gave two to another, and he gave some to another one. But the moral of that story is this. The ones that he gave, out of them, they every one doubled up on what God had given them. They had used it. And they had used it to the glory of that person who had took that journey, which represents Christ. He comes back, and the man has the one talent, and he buries it, and he would not use it. Now, if God has given you some of the things of the world and we don't use it to his glory, we're going to be like the one talent person. Because everything that me and you have, whether you want to agree to it or not, it is through the blessings of God. Everything we have, the very clothes on your back, are the blessings of God. You might say, well, I work for them. Well, you probably did. You probably paid out your money, but who gave you the job? Who blessed you with the job? Who blessed you with the health to do the job? So if our life is all about the riches here, then in the end we're going to weep and howl, because there's going to be a lot of misery come upon us. A lot of misery. Because these riches are going to be in judgment against us, just like these guys here, or whoever they may be. All right. Let's try to get the next one in here. Why should they weep?
For their miseries.
All right. See, this is one thing that, what are the rich men told to do? They're to weep and howl. Why is the misery coming upon them? Or why should they weep? It's because the misery is coming upon them. These miseries, you know, I look at this word misery, and I look at it just a little bit different than what's going to happen at the end of time. This is something that is going to happen, and the definition here for misery is not like hell itself. But look, here's the definition of it. Hardship, trouble, calamity. That's the ideal here. So when you look at these rich men, and these rich men being who James has wrote to the Jews that were scattered. So what was going to happen in Jerusalem was going to affect all them. Because remember how that the Jews held to that magnificent temple. And when it happened to that temple and all of it falls, remember Jesus said not one stone would be left upon another. Could you imagine the misery of losing all that they had, and even to the temple that they had where they worshiped for years and years and years, that it's all gone? You see, that was the trouble and the miseries that was going to be upon them.
You know, those same miseries, that's going to go to the poor too, right? I mean, that did not become Christians.
Well, that's to all that was in Jerusalem was going to suffer this. But here's the thing about it. Let's just say, just like today, and I guess this would be a fair analogy of what went on here. Let's say that you got, say, thousands upon, it's untelling how much money you got in the stock market out here. But all at once, the stock market crashes, it's flat broke, bam, that's it. Like it did, what, in the 30s, maybe in 20s? Okay, they were people that jumped out of the buildings, they said, and committed suicide because they couldn't stand the thoughts of being broke. Okay, if the stock market went broke today, if they announced right now the stock market went flat broke, as much as I would hate that, I'm not going to lose anything because I don't have a penny invested in it. But for those who have investments in it that's going to lose probably everything they got, can you see the difference?
Yeah.
Yes, poor is going to be in it, but they're not going to be, they're already destituted. They ain't got money to buy what they need to start with. So here you got all these wealthy people with all this stuff, and what good is it? What good is it? That's what Jesus meant when he said, if you should gain this whole world and lose your soul, what would you give in exchange? And Jesus is just trying to show by that regardless of what you got in this world is not worth losing your soul over. People need to understand that their soul is the most valuable possession that they possess. That's what people need to understand. The things of the world is not going to last forever. The world is not going to last forever. Your fleshly body is not going to last forever. But the soul that is in you will last forever. It's something that has no end to it. So that's what we need to think about and try to take care of. Now, when he talks about this silver being cankered here, now, it's just that silver will tarnish is the ideal here. And rust. Now, we know that silver and money really don't rust because of the way it's made. Now, theirs may. Of them that shall be and rust, of them shall be witness against you. In other words, here you go look at this money, and it's laid here so long without being put to any use. It's not been put to any use to help the Lord. It's not been put to any use to help somebody who is really and truly in need. Now, we're not talking about helping people that's too lazy to work, but people who really need. And yet that money is laid there, and it's not been put to any use. That's what he's talking about. He's not talking about you having money. He's not talking about you being a well-to-do person. He's just talking about people who have no other purpose in life but hoarding it up and using it for their own benefit. You remember back over in James chapter 4, what he says here? He says, you ask and you do not receive because you asked amiss, that you may spend it on your pleasures. Everything was about their pleasure. Everything has to be about me. And when it's like that, then that's what makes it bad. So these people have got some miseries coming up on them. Remember, Festus Hagen used to use that for illness. He'd say they got the miseries. Well, these people are going to have the miseries because these are going to be rich people who are fixing to lose everything. Everything. I mean, everything that they have, it will be no good to them. All right. Does this mean that one who is rich could not please God? No, it does not. It does not mean that at all. So we just got to learn to do what God would have us to do with it. According to James, what shall happen to riches?
Corrupting.
All right. Anybody got anything else? Okay. I put they will be corrupted and be a witness. All right. Note, the circumstances show that the apostle speaks of stored corn, wine, and oil, which could corrupt garments, gold or silver.
All of them.
Huh?
All of them.
Moth-eaten garments is moth-eaten.
Okay, the verse 2 where he's talking about could be corrupted is to be destroyed, to just like the wine here that they're talking about, it could run because they had no way of keeping it. Most of you wine in these days here were put in like skin bags. They call a bottle, but yet it's actually skin bags. And so they in a while could corrupt or ruin. The garments are destroyed because of the moths and stuff. No, does this indicate that these riches were not being used?
Sounds like it,
Yeah, and that's the problem with these riches. They were just not. Mark hit on it a while ago when he is talking about the barns. It's like the rich man that says, I've got so much that my old barns are not going to hold it. Well, rather than saying what I'll do is I'll take all from my old barns that can be used and I'll try to help people with it. I'll try to give to people that truly is in need, and then I'll restock it all with my fresh. No, that wasn't what he said. He said, I'll just take and tear down my old barns and I'll build bigger barns. I'll just build bigger barn. So I can just keep hooping it up, And I like that when you look at verse 5 especially. Ye have lived in pleasure on earth, and been wanting. Ye have nourished your hearts as a day of slaughter. What do you think that verse is talking about?
Greed.
Well, that's greed, but what is the picture that James wants us to see here from that verse? There's something about that verse that should, sort of get us if we really looked at the verse close.
Fulfilling the desires, all the desires.
Well, that's true too. Well, I'll just go ahead and tell you what I'm thinking here. He says, you've lived in pleasure on earth and been wanting. You have nourished your heart. You in everything that you wanted, you've satisfied yourself. As in the day of slaughter. Now here's the idea. He goes just like an ox, a picking and a grazing and a eating and a fatting. And that old ox don't know that he's eating himself right to an early grave. Well, not necessarily an early grave, but to an early table, we'll say. Because that's what he's talking about. He's saying, look, you all have fattened yourself up just like a calf or an ox or a sheep or a goat or whatever the case may be for the day of slaughter. You have fattened yourself. In other words, you have made yourself right. You have made yourself ripe. And you know what? When you read in Matthew chapter 24 about the destruction of Jerusalem, when the fullness of time would come, when the right time would come, just like that ox had fattened itself, then judgment would hit Jerusalem. And that's what God did. All right, anybody got any question or comment they want to make on the things we already talked about? Okay, look at 3. What was to be a witness against the rich? All right, the corrosion of it. So when you think about that, it's like I pick up this Bible and I lay it over here like this. And I lay it down. And somebody says, Billy, did you move that Bible? No, I didn't know. I didn't touch it. No, I've never touched that Bible. So what do? They come in with their little powder thing and they start dusting it. And guess what's going to show up on it? My big thumbprint right there. Just like this corrosion would be their thumbprint. And the corrosion would show that this money has laid here for many of years maybe, and it has not been handled. Because when money is handled, and it's handled a lot, you can look at your monies and you can tell which coin has been used a lot because it'll show wear on it. It'll show wear on it.
Over a long period of time, gold turns green.
Not if it's used. Not if it's used.
But if it's not being touched or moved, say in a tomb or something, when they find it, it's green as a gourd.
Right. And that's, yeah, that's the fingerprint that shows that this money has not been used. That's why he says this corrosion, not the money itself, but the corrosion from it, will show that you cannot deny that you used it for any kind of good purpose because it's corroded there. If it was being used and passed on and passed around, it wouldn't be like that.
It's like top of your head where it's being used a whole lot. It's kind of being... Oh, did I say that loud? I'm sorry.
What? No, now wait a minute. I'll take that as a compliment. Because a head that ain't being used ain't worth 10 cents. So I'll take that as a compliment, Mark, with that. That's pretty good, and I'll remember that. Just remember, Mark, I don't get mad, I get even. All right. Corrosion, what does this mean? They were not being used then for the glory of God or for any other reason. How will it affect them? How will it affect them?
Be used against them in the last days, won't it, my God?
Flash that far.
That's the thing. It says that this money will eat your flesh like fire. You know, and when I think of that and look at that and try to reason that in my mind, here's what I come away with. Is that these people are so set on the things of this world that it eats at them just like a fire. it's just like a burning fire. It's like sticking your finger in the fire and it just sitting there. It's just burning in you. It's just burning in you like a fire. Now, it's not a good fire because he says it's eating your flesh. It's eating your flesh like fire.
You can't be content, probably. You're always thinking about what can I buy or
What can I...
how can I make some more?
Right. And that consumes the whole life, and it's just eating at you. It's like a person in life, and we've got to stop here just in a minute, but it's like a person in life. They just can't bring themselves to settle down on this is where I'm at in life and be like Paul says, be content. Be content there. Don't allow the things of the world to consume you, because they will. And consuming you, they will destroy you. Things of the world destroys people. Money destroys people. Because the more they get, the more they want, the more they get, the more they want, and it just consumes them. And people like that is all time looking for something of the world to make them happy. Let me tell you something. Things of this world are not going to make you happy. Oh, you get it and you're all excited about it, but just in a little while, it loses its appeal. It loses its excitement. So we need to learn to be content with life and use what God has given us for the greater glory of God. Now, that don't mean that we have to give everything we got up, but it does need to say that we need to use what God has given us and not just think that we're just here to harbor up and store. And that's what a lot of people think. Anybody got any questions? Because we got to quit right here. All right. If not, we'll start back next Wednesday night.